Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Malcolm Renfrew Interdisciplinary Colloquium for Tuesday, November 9th, 2021. And it's great to see so many of you here with us today. I think this may be close to our largest attendance of the semester. If you are joining us for the first time, the Renfrew Colloquium is a weekly series of presentations by University of Idaho faculty, by graduate students, by postdoctoral fellows, and an occasional visiting scholar, and an occasional university vice president, and all speaking about their teaching, their research, their outreach, and their service. And we've been doing this now in our 21st year. The colloquium was founded in September of 2001. I'm Kenton Bird. I'm the host for today's program, and my collaborator and the founder of the series is with us as well, Dan Buckfitch. And together we put together a program every year. And before introducing today's guest, I just wanted to mention that we are now in the proposal phase for the second semester for spring of 2022. If you or anyone that you know might be a good candidate for presenting in spring of 2022, please encourage them to either submit a nomination or a self-nomination. And we're going to be working over the Thanksgiving break to start identifying programs. This semester has been entirely on Zoom. Next semester, we're going to try Zoom for the first half of the semester. That is up to spring break. And then in the second half of the semester, we'll schedule some in-person sessions as well as field trips to visit faculty or staff in their labs, their studios, and classrooms, and maybe a few outdoor sites on campus. And I'd also like to introduce next week's speaker, and that is Professor Phil Mead from the College of Art and Architecture, and he will be speaking about his research on architectural lessons from the world's happiest countries based on his sabbatical in Scandinavia in spring of 2020. But today, I'm honored to introduce our Vice President for Research and Economic Development, Christopher Nomura, who is relatively new to the University of Idaho, coming here just a little more than a year ago, October of 2020, from the State University of New York. And many of you, especially those of you engaged in the research enterprise of this university, have already met our vice president. But if you haven't, you're in for a treat today. And his topic is the University of Idaho's quest for R1, that is the highest category of research universities, and what our progress is so far, and perhaps what challenges lie ahead. So welcome, Chris. We're delighted to have you with us today.
Thank you so much, Kenton, and it's a real pleasure to be here. I'm pretty excited to talk about this, and I'm pleased to see that there's so many people interested in this topic. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen here to get started. Let's see.
There you go.
Can you all see a presentation mode, or?
We can see it as well as your notes. So if you want to conceal your notes in the setting there, then we won't see the next slide. There you go. Perfect. That's great. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody. So today I want to talk again about the UVi's quest for Carnegie R1 status. And so this is a progress report. And it kind of got me thinking about quests in general. And if any of you ever read any of the stories from King Arthur, there was something called the questing beast. It has another name that I don't know how to pronounce necessarily, but it was this weird hybrid mythological creature that people were sort of searching for. And, there's a lot of quests associated with that era. And I feel like, this is a quest and it's something that's worth pursuing for the University of Idaho. As Kenton mentioned, the R1 status is one that indicates the highest research activity for any university. And there, right now, the Carnegie Association basically has ranked 130 institutions with this ranking, have received this type of ranking of R1 or very, very high research status. And, when I talk to my colleagues around the country at other universities, R1 is sort of a shorthand for, in some ways, a top research university, right? Many people use that as an indicator, but it's also really important for things such as national or international rankings of an institution. And it generally demonstrates, I would say, the comprehensive excellence of a university. And this is, one of the main reasons we're pursuing it. It comes with funding and a lot of other things, but I'm going to sort of talk about this a little bit. So first, I just want to talk about what is the Carnegie classification for institutions of higher education, right? These are awarded to doctoral universities, right? And these universities, in order to qualify for a ranking within the Carnegie system in R1 or R2, you have to award at least 20 research scholarship doctorates, and this is from 2016-17, or at least 30 professional practice doctorates across at least 2 programs. And you need to have at least $5 million in research expenditures as reported through the NSF HERD survey. So this is a National Science Foundation survey that monitors the expenses for all the different universities. And it's based upon a level of research activity for those institutions. So one can be assigned to one of 2 different categories, R1 or R2, based upon that research activity. And they basically use the following through a research activity index to correlate activities, right? So they have this complex formula, but they look at these things in particular. They look at research and development expenditures in science and engineering. They look at research expenditures in non-science and engineering fields. And then they look at science and engineering research staff. And so these are postdoctoral appointees or non-faculty research staff with doctorates. And they look at doctorates awarded in humanities, social science, STEM, and other fields, right? So it's a combination of all of these different elements that the Carnegie organization uses, and understand that this is a relative ranking, okay? So essentially you're compared across the whole field of other institutions that meet this first category of doctoral research universities. And then they compare these various categories with a series of weighted metrics in order to come up with those rankings. And so, as Kenton mentioned earlier, the R1 ranking is doctoral universities with very high research activity. And in the last categorization, there were 130 universities that fell into this category out of all universities within the United States. And then R2 doctoral universities, of which the University of Idaho currently is, fall into a high research activity. Now, there are other universities that grant advanced degrees, so doctoral or professional universities, and this is generally for like medical universities. They have their own category, right? That's separate. And this was a recent sort of change in the Carnegie ranking. So one thing before we proceed forward is that I want to emphasize that in some ways, these rankings they're very fluid and they can be changeable, right? Carnegie can change their system, and they have in the past, and they may do so in the future, but we have no way of understanding like what they're going to do. It's a very opaque process, to say the least. But what we do know is some historical things. And what I would point out is that this quest for R1 at the University of Idaho, this started before I got here to the University of Idaho, but it was one of the things that was really attractive to me to come to the University of Idaho, is because I thought this was such a great aspirational goal for the university to achieve. So what are some of the things that led us to believe that we could do this? And I do think we can do this. So if we look at a couple of different elements of these metrics, this is a table basically showing all these different universities and their total research expenditures. So way over here on the left is Johns Hopkins University, which blows everybody out of the ballpark with like over $2 billion in research expenditures, right, on an annual basis. And then you have this continuum of a number of other universities. And right smack dab in the middle, it's a little hard to see, and I apologize, but there's a slightly different color than the rest of these blue lines here. I think that is what represents the University of Idaho, and this is based back on a 2018 assessment of our data. And you know what this basically shows, that University of Idaho is ranked about 127 out of 260 institutions. They had about $110 million in research expenditures. If you look slightly to our left, to one of our aspirational peer institutions, Montana State University, they're at $130 million in annual expenditures. And what you can see here is that expenditures don't necessarily indicate that one is an R1 institution, right? So there's a number of R2 institutions that have higher research expenditures here. And then you have some other ones down on the other side of the research expenditures that are R1 institutions that have much lower research expenditures. So research expenditures is an important element for getting to R1, but it's not the only element to get there, right? And so what this other graph is showing here are total doctoral degrees for research and scholarship. And here, University of Idaho is 203 out of 260. And again, we look to our aspirational peer, Montana State. They're, in terms of, I'm not going to say the lowest R1, they're the lowest PhD producing R1 in this year, right? With 66 PhDs versus University of Idaho produced 54 PhDs in this particular cycle. So what these figures are to demonstrate is that expenditures and doctorate production have a major impact on one's placement within these rankings. And the other takeaways that we look at here is that University of Idaho, generally, we have adequate research expenditures, right? We're not in the lowest end, we're not the highest end, but you know, we have research expenditures that indicate that we could be competitive in this range. But we also have relatively low PhD production as compared to the other institutions. So the Carnegie system, they rank those categories that I mentioned to you previously, and then they put everybody within these relative rankings onto these scatter plots. So this is based on 2018 data for the University of Idaho. And these, again, are some of the categories that I talked about, right? So these are STEM research scholarship doctoral degrees, humanities research scholarship doctoral degrees, social science research scholarship doctoral degrees, and then number of research scholarship doctoral degrees conferred in professional fields, so not in those three fields. And then we have non-science and engineering research development expenditures, science and engineering research development expenditures, and then postdocs and non-faculty research staff with doctorates. And then finally, here on the far end here, this is basically the number of faculty and ladder rank at the institution. So these were the University of Idaho's numbers back in 2018. And what you can see here in this scatter plot, essentially, is there's a lot of blue dots here. And then forgive me because I'm colorblind, I'm not sure if this is green or red, but these other dots that are not blue on this side, which I believe might be green, these represent essentially institutions that were categorized as R1 institutions by the Carnegie classification system. The blue dots are representative of R2 institutions. And the circle here with this dot in the center is representative of the University of Idaho at 2018. So as you can see from this scatter plot, we were approaching essentially this border between the R2 universities and the R1 universities, okay? So the Carnegie classifications that we look at, again, we're looking at these various metrics, and these are the current metrics that Carnegie is using. Again, Carnegie could choose to change any of these, but historically these have been used as ways that they've relatively ranked the institutions. So they do they basically look at this ranking. They were doing it every 5 years. They switched to every 3 years. And so, the next update for this has been confirmed for December 2021, right? So we've already talked with Dean McMurtry and Wes McClintock and Senior Associate VP Research Brad Ritz to be ready for this type of review, right? And essentially, the University of Idaho metrics are going to be drawn from, and this is a typo, I apologize, this will be fiscal year 1920 and fall 2020. They're going to reflect any kind of investments that we've made currently. And these metrics are they're not really that different from the 2018 analysis for the University of Idaho. So as an example, our research expenditures, they went up from about 111 million to 113 million in that time frame. University of Idaho was ranked 151 in the fiscal year 18 research expenditures and 152 for fiscal year 2019. If we look at our non-faculty research staff with doctorates, we went from 102 to 105. The faculty, ladder rank faculty decreased slightly from 529 to 520, but our doctoral degrees have gone up significantly, right? So up to 80 for a single year increase from 50 total the previous year. And so the R1 working group, which I'll get to in a moment, has shown that large increases in doctoral production and postdoctoral researchers are necessary to materially move the University of Idaho position. But what I want to show you is that some of our competitor institutions had some significant swings. And this is to point out that this is not, all those dots in that graph I showed you previously, they're not static, right? And so if we look at this, right, for example, the University of Idaho, again, was 151 in fiscal year 18, research expenditures, 152 in 2019. If we look at some of the other institutions there, University of Oregon was ranked just above us in fiscal year 2018, and then they dropped to 154 in 2019, right? So they kind of flip-flopped with us in their position based on their expenditures and so forth. Wyoming, which was ranked 149 in 2018, fell to 171 in 2019. The University of Montana, conversely, moved from $90 million in fiscal year 18 expenditures to 104 million in 2019. And we see similar large move at UNLV. They went from $83 million in research expenditures to 99. And Montana State University, they had a very strong climb to 135 with 155 million in research expenditures, up from 125 million in 2018. So none of those other dots will remain static. A lot of this is going to be dependent on all those other elements that those universities are going to report right back to the Carnegie Foundation. So here's what it looks like in relative terms from 2018, our position, to where we ended up in 2021. So you can see we've moved slightly over to the right. So we're getting closer to this edge, but we still have a ways to go to get into this other side of this, I guess I would say an imaginary border. And again, the caution here is that the other universities are not necessarily static. So this move that's shown here is demonstrating like none of these other dots have actually moved from here. And this is based upon a model that Wes McClintock developed, looking at all these different categories as to where, we predictably might move on this scale, right? So the other dots may move. Some are going to move back this way. Some are going to move this way. We can't anticipate what all of those are going to do until the actual report comes out. So this is a relative scale. But there are some areas that we can invest in. So as I mentioned previously, before I got here, there was a great working group at the university that consisted of multiple stakeholders. And they developed a report that had a number of recommendations, right? So there was a plan that outlined investments in postdoctoral fellowships, investments in graduate research assistantships, reallocation of some teaching assistantships to prioritize programs with externally funded research productivity and productive doctoral programs, changes in facilities and administrative allocations, increase endowed graduate fellowships, raising funds for undergraduate scholarships to help facilitate that F&A change, and clear commitments to accountability by investing in productive programs and divesting from programs that do not meet expectations. So these are all from that report. What I'd like to discuss for a large part of what I'm going to talk about today are these two efforts that the Office of Research and Economic Development has been working towards to meet these recommendations. So how do you fund such an initiative, right? So many of you probably already know this information, but this is a refresher for those who don't. The university entered into an innovative public-private partnership, or P3 relationship. So the University of Idaho signed an agreement for a 50-year lease of our steam plant and utility system with Cesare Plenary Utility Partners in Idaho, Limited Liability Corporation. So it's a private company that's basically leasing our steam plant facilities, right? And you might ask yourself, why would a company want to do this? Well, there's a number of benefits that company gets, right? So first of all, the University of Idaho is paying an annual fee for this partnership, right? That fee includes a fixed fee that increases annually to an agreed upon amount. And I kind of liken this almost to a loan that you would have. And then it has a variable fee, which provides that private partner a return on and a return of the capital funds for improvements to the utility system. So this private partner is going to manage our steam plant and utility system to improve it. And as they improve it, right, they're going to invest capital into that. Eventually, the University of Idaho will have to pay for those capital improvements because we will still own that enterprise. And then it also includes an operations and maintenance fee as compensation for costs that basically happen during the operation of the utility. So this cost is roughly equivalent to our previous annual cost for that facility, right, when it was just simply a University of Idaho facility, okay? So the University of Idaho, though, gets some significant benefits from this relationship. So first of all, we have now a private operator that's providing both an opportunity and incentive to maximize the efficiency and effectiveness of the steam plant. So they're actually going to invest in this because they will get a return on that investment, but we benefit from that ultimately because this will be returned to us in 50 years. So those improvements will, we pay for them, but we get them. And presumably it's going to help us with our sustainability efforts for the campus going forward, as well as save on energy costs. But the real benefit that we're talking about today is that we received this very large upfront payment to the university that got invested, and it's basically expected to generate $6 million annually to fund 3 strategic initiatives for the university. So the first is in graduate student success and research, and this is basically used to increase the number of grad student and postdoc positions, and we're getting approximately $3 million a year to do that. The other areas are telling our story to recruit new students to the University of Idaho, and then student success initiatives like scholarships and growing online education, right? And so this is what's material to this discussion today, is that, you know, this is an unprecedented amount of funding that the University of Idaho that could now invest towards this particular initiative. So from that $3 million, we have developed a program that's called the P3R1 Grant Matching Program. And there's essentially three mechanisms that we're looking at to leverage these dollars that we're getting from the P3 investments, right? So one is this matching of competitive externally funded grants. Another is a matching for new and externally funded endowed fellowships. And then third is in various strategic initiatives to move the university forward. And our purpose for these investments, right? Again, we want to significantly increase the award of research and scholarship doctoral degrees at the University of Idaho. Remember, PhD production is one of the critical categories that the Carnegie system is looking at in order to move things materially forward. We also need to significantly increase the amount of externally funded research at the University of Idaho. So this is, again, another set of those expenditures, both science and engineering research expenditures, as well as non-science and engineering research expenditures, are important elements for the Carnegie rankings. And finally, we want to increase the effective F&A rate of the externally funded research at the University of Idaho. Why do we want to do this? Ultimately, it's so that we can reinvest more of those funds towards research and other activities at the university. Now, the main bolus of this funding, of the P3R1 funding, is being deployed as match on newly awarded externally funded grants, right? And the way that this is done is applications are initiated by the lead principal investigator of an externally funded grant through, essentially, we have an award form that's on info-ready review. So we've created a pretty simple system. If you have an award that meets certain criteria, you can simply submit this, and then this application gets reviewed by a committee monthly or as needed. That committee consists of myself, Senior Associate Vice President for Research, Brad Ritz, and a cadre of the deans, right? So Dennis Becker, Michael Perella, Ginger Carney, John Crapeau, Phil Scruggs, and Sean Quinlan are all members of this committee that's looking at these various awards. And the committee considers adjustments to programs like the match ratios, and I'll talk about that in a moment. They also consider reallocation requests from doctoral students to postdocs or vice versa, and we'll go over that in a second. And matches made on first come basis until funds are committed. So in other words, this is a rolling program that people can apply to. So as they get an award, they're automatically eligible to apply until we don't have any more funds. So when we don't have any more funds, we won't award any more of these awards. So one of those categories is within doctoral research assistantships. Essentially, we will provide one research assistantship for every 2 research assistantships that are funded on a single new external award. Those grants must include full federally negotiated on-campus industry or ag forestry experiment station F&A rates, and grants with off-campus and reduced F&A rates are not eligible. And the reason that we have to do this is because I mentioned before, the P3 funds or those initiatives, there's essentially this ongoing fee that we have to pay back to our private partner. So these funds are helping to offset those costs, right? We have to have some funds to pay that essentially long-term agreement back. Externally funded research assistantships must include a full stipend at their normal department rates and tuition in order to be matched by this program. And then graduate support funds in a grant cannot be reallocated or rebudgeted to other categories over the life of the award, or internal funds provided must be repaid by the department. So you can't just take these funds and then say, you know what, I want to buy this new machine instead of paying my PhD student. This is meant to fund these doctoral students. And then the matches occur at the same stipend level that was indicated within the grant itself. So whatever you budgeted within your grant, that's what you get matched for. And again, this institutional match is applied to support PhD students because this, again, is one of those elements within the Carnegie criteria that's being evaluated. The other big category is in postdoctoral fellowships. So we have a number of different categories that can help fund these positions. So one is a 2-year postdoctoral fellowship will be provided to all NSF career grant recipients. So the career awards are highly prestigious awards for new faculty or untenured faculty at the time to really launch their career in research with the National Science Foundation. And so we want to encourage people to compete for those awards and reward them when they get them, right? We would also consider other prestigious early career awards, for example, the DARPA Young Faculty Awards or equivalents. We also plan to provide 1 2-year postdoctoral fellowship to all PIs who receive an NIH R01 as an assistant professor or within 1 year of promotion to associate professor. These are very long-term grants, and we want to encourage people to apply for them. And then 1 postdoctoral fellowship for every fully funded, externally funded postdoctoral fellowship. So this is a matching program. Again, the criteria are very similar for the doctoral students. Those grants must include full federally negotiated on-campus industry or ag forestry experiment station F&A. Grants with other F&A rates are not eligible. And then 1 2-year postdoctoral fellowship support will be provided to PIs with at least 4 fully funded PhD students on a single new grant award, such as a large training grant. So we're trying to encourage people to build out both PhDs that are coming through the institution, right, as well as to seek awards that are supporting a larger set of, a larger set of individuals. So currently, right, if we look at our commitments for up to September 2021, we've invested just over $5 million into this particular program. And this is sort of a breakdown of when we started this off. So we started late fiscal year 21, so we didn't have a lot of awards, but as awards have picked up, we've been starting to distribute more of these funds towards these matching programs. All of this is tracked via a spreadsheet that's maintained by the financial operations within ORED. So we have a list of all of the PIs, right, and what departments and so forth that they're in, as well as what they're being funded for over those time periods. If we look at our funding highlights, this pie chart basically shows the financial distribution of these awards based by colleges that are participating in the program currently, right? So we've had 56 different awards that have been funded. These are funding 23 new postdocs and 37 and a half, and this is kind of a weird thing, but we have 37 and a half new PhD students that are being supported by these awards. And here in this small table shows essentially where these things are at. But you can see we have a broad distribution across CNR, College of Science, Cal, COE, CLAS, COGS, and CEHHS. So we're very happy with this broad participation in the program. And it takes this broad participation in the program in order for us to be legitimately competitive to move up within the Carnegie rankings. So again, we have about 5.6 million committed through fiscal year 24 to date. We're working on some strategic match for some co-funded new faculty positions in CNR. And if we look at the Carnegie classification update, we had a pretty big jump in doctoral degrees, which is really promising, right? 80 doctoral degrees were awarded last year. And this is likely not a COVID fluke. So I had some discussions with Jerry and saying, well, maybe because of COVID, a lot of faculty were trying to get their students out the door because of COVID. And that doesn't seem to be the case. COGS has basically reported that our graduate cohorts began increasing back in 2014. So we're building our doctoral awards off an existing upward trend in admissions. We've had increasing graduate admissions consistently. And so this is very promising for us to get towards this goal. We still have some work to do. We're currently considering TA reallocation. So there's probably up to 54 positions that might be reallocated to prioritize doctoral degree production. But those discussions are ongoing, and it's not going to necessarily be immediate. We need to figure out how we're going to transition this into the university. And then we're looking at some other areas that we might use to improve our position, right? So there's potential for improvements to gen ed requirements, both to improve undergraduate experience and retention while providing concomitant improvement in TA distribution. So how are we going to look at what we're doing in those categories? We want to look at the impact of TA effort in a financial model for this. And then there's other individual department strategies, teaching and research loads, RA support, awards. How can those be done sort of on a more localized level? And so this is where we would like to hear from people across the university about how departments might join in this effort. So I'm going to go back to this chart for a second, because so from 2018 to 2021, we have had a material jump, relatively speaking, within our position, but we haven't gotten close to this or into this area yet, right? So we need to move from here at least into here, right? We want to be on at least on this edge. And so this scatter plot here, again, all of these numbers are static relative to the 2018 numbers that I showed you in the beginning. But this program that Wes developed allows us to kind of look at some various scenarios. How would these things jump based upon these various categories going forward? And so what I want to present you with next is just a table that's looking at what happens when you change some of these various categories or these elements, basically based on this static picture, what it would do to our relative position. So in 2018, right, we had 102 postdocs, 54 PhDs that were produced, about 105 million research expenditures. The outcome was that we're squarely in R2. This is our current right now, 105 postdocs, 79 PhDs, 113 in research expenditures. We're anticipating that this is still squarely going to be within the R2 based on that static image that I just showed you previously. Now, it doesn't mean that we will be, but I think it's very likely because there's going to be some positions moving around, but I think it'll probably be the same. We looked at some other categories here, and one of the things that's really interesting about this is that, again, if we go back to this graph, you see these various categories up here. And I just want to point out, when we look at this hypothetical here where we're at the border, we've created a small assumption about one PhD in the humanities within this particular scenario. And when we look at this scenario for almost every scenario, we notice that producing a single PhD in a humanities-based PhD, right, along with increasing postdoctoral researchers, right, and PhD programs will have a significant effect. So if you raise your postdocs, which is something that I'll talk about in a moment, to double our postdoc numbers and maintain a relative number of PhDs relative to last year, add one PhD and have what I'm going to say is a modest increase in research expenditure going from 113 million to 135. You're right in that zone, okay, that I just showed you. The same thing can happen if you increase your total PhDs up to 110, right? With that single humanity PhD, as well as $130 million in research, you're right in that zone. So what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that although not any singular category might push you forward, and we'll see this as we go further, right? We can keep increasing the postdocs as you can see here. So we had 200 postdocs, 80 PhDs, no humanities PhD, and $135 million expenditures. We're likely going to be in a similar position in R2. If you had 500 postdocs, right, with a similar number of PhDs back to our production in 2018 and increased our research expenditures, you would be near this particular zone. But what this is showing is that there's not as you increase the number in any singular category, essentially you get diminishing returns in how you might move within that graphic space. But one of the things based on this sensitivity testing that we've noticed is that it is really crucial to have a PhD produced in a humanities related field, as well as social science related fields. These are probably going to be required for us to get to the R1 ranking. And then the other part of this is that doctoral research staff is really important. And they can be implemented relatively quickly and therefore represent a really good opportunity for the university to expand their impact in that particular area. So this leads us to a new initiative that we're looking at within this funding scheme, and that is doctoral level research staff investments. So because we want to try to accelerate this process to a degree, we're looking to invest money in doctoral level research staff, so postdocs and research scientists. And we want to invest in areas and in individuals who are going to be capable of securing external funding, right? So this is at level sufficient to support an additional postdoc as independent researchers. And we want to invest in improving organizational capability in areas of strategic importance. So we recently reached out to the deans to ask them to give us some proposals for these areas, and we've received over 80 proposals from colleges for this effort. So there's a really an incredible amount of interest in this. There's a lot there, so we're currently reviewing them, and as we kind of finish that review process, we'll probably report that out as to where those things are going. But I think it's also quite exciting to see that everybody is participating in this and looking in this in such an intense way. Okay, so I also want to talk briefly about some other initiatives that we've undertaken to support this quest to R1 and to support research overall. And so there's three categories I just want to update folks on right now. And so these three categories are, we have a new federal relations and grant support group called McAllister and Quinn, and I'll talk very briefly about them. And then I want to talk a little bit about research and faculty development. Some of you already know of this unit within ORED and some of the efforts that they're doing. And then I want to talk about a particular program that I recall Operation Resubmission Support. So McAllister and Quinn is our new federal relations and grant support liaison in Washington, D.C. They were founded back in 2004, and they've specialized in securing funding for a wide range of organizations, but they have a particular emphasis in higher ed. So we recently made this change. We had been working with a federal relation firm for a number of decades here at the University of Idaho. And when I came in here, we did just sort of a brief data analysis on sort of the ROI of that particular firm. And we decided to go in a new direction. So we interviewed a number of different firms in DC. And this firm, McAllister and Quinn, rose to the top. They had excellent references from a number of universities, and a number of universities that moved from an R2 to an R1, such as UC Irvine, who are using this group. And they spoke glowingly about them. They have about 40, a little over 40 staff members who have come from all sorts of areas that help them in their mission, both the legislative and executive branches, so people who've worked as congressional staffers. So they really know the ins and outs of the processes at the federal level. But there's a number of them who've also come from academia, nonprofits, and industry. So they have a very diverse portfolio of people that can help us get our federal request across. In addition to this, they have 300 plus grant writers, consultants, and subject matter experts that they can deploy towards our projects. And so right now they're working, we just have gone through an onboarding phase with them where they've talked with a number of leadership positions within colleges to talk about our congressional and agency engagement strategy for the University of Idaho. They've also already started providing what I'm going to call funding opportunity forecasts. So they're reaching out to the agencies or getting information from agencies as soon as possible and conveying that to the U of I so that our research and faculty development group can get that information to you as faculty members about new opportunities. They also have a number of events that they're working in terms of capacity building. So there's a number of things that we're going to be working with them on, coaching faculty through various processes and how to interact with various agency directives. And then they also are going to be helping with grant strategy. There's a number of different areas where they're going to be providing external reviews for grants that we're developing here at the University of Idaho, which is extremely valuable when these have to go into competitive spaces in order to compete, right? So by sort of taking a red team to these proposals early on, we could try to get the best proposals out there, most competitive proposals out there. Now, this team is working very closely with a number of deans, but they're also working very closely with our research faculty development team that I'm going to talk about here. And many of you already know this, but this is a group that's led by Dr. Carly Cummings, and they offer a number of different services for faculty. So proposal development services, they're helping to identify potential funding sources that you can apply for. And then they'll help you as a faculty member to develop and strengthen your proposals. They can provide reviews and so forth. And then in research development services, they're really going to focus a lot to help on more large and complex proposals. They can be really helpful with timelines and coordination of tasks and building partnerships and so forth that might be necessary for that. They're working very closely with our McAllister and Quinn colleagues to provide support for these grants. And we have a number of units that are currently doing this. And then they also lead our faculty development efforts, which I would highly encourage people to participate in, which include faculty success seminars, NSF career award support and developing timelines, and a large myriad of grant writing workshops to help you hone your craft to be more competitive towards funds. And then finally, what I want to talk about is a relatively new program. We just started this last year called Operation Resubmission Support. There's been a number of studies at the National Academy of Science and Engineering Medicine and others that have demonstrated that it's very rare that people are funded the first time they submit a proposal. And this program is meant to help people after they receive reviews. So you may not have been funded, but you may have received favorable reviews, right? You may have received some very specific feedback on how you should address some particular issues to make your proposal more competitive. And this program is really meant to try to help you address those issues and resubmit your proposal, because it's been shown that for those people who can address those issues and resubmit, they have a much higher likelihood of success of being funded, okay? So competitive applications for this program are those that have received overall favorable reviews. So there's no fatal flaw that's been identified by the reviewers on the panel, but we're lacking in a particular aspect, right? And so we're asking people to submit the following for this, for consideration for this support. So we want to see the reviews from the sponsor or from the panel, and a documentation of your correspondence with a program officer about resubmission, so that they're saying, yeah, you should resubmit this, right? We want to see your response to the reviews and how you plan to address the weaknesses that have been identified. And then a budget and budget justification for the requested funding to address those said weaknesses, as well as a biographical sketch for the PI and a timeline for when you would resubmit. And we have some funding marked aside for this program, and we'll fund up to whatever we can afford to fund that's within your budget justification to do this. But we really want you to focus on submitting, resubmitting your proposal again, particularly if it has a competitive chance to get funded. We think it's well worth those investments. So in summary, I just want to say that, in our quest for R1, the University of Idaho has made some significant investments to bolster research here. And I think they've been unprecedented at the university from things that I've heard back from some of you as faculty members. And I think we are demonstrating we are a comprehensive research institution with highly impactful research, right? We want people to know about that, and we want to get to that R1 status. And I really want to emphasize that all of you are part of this quest, right? This quest can't be achieved by any singular individual. It is a collective effort of all of us to try to get here. And as I said before, R1 is a shorthand for research excellence. And it is a way that we can improve our rankings in a number of different areas. So Ken, I just want to thank you and your working group for allowing me to come and talk here today. And I'd be happy to open this up for any questions from the audience.
Thank you, Vice President Nomura, for that informative and detailed and both historic and forward-looking presentation. I was on an R1 committee about 10 years ago, and a lot of progress has been made since then. And it looks like we're just looking at that scatter plot that we're moving closer to that R1, R2 border. So I'd be glad to allow some questions from the audience. And if we don't finish by 1:30, I think we can go past that if you don't have another appointment coming up right away. I know there's a lot of good information there that we'd love to hear people respond to, or maybe pose some questions in different ways. Those of us that have been here a long time and those of us who are relatively new to the university. So if you wanted to go ahead and if you're comfortable turning on your camera and unmuting yourself, you could raise a hand, or you could put a question directly into chat. I can begin with a question from the perspective of someone in the humanities and social sciences. My unit sort of crosses those, and I'm wondering how we within the College of Letters, Arts, and Social Sciences can build our PhD productivity when many of the units in our college are struggling to just to cover the basic undergraduate and those units that have master's degrees. So is there a sort of a bottom-up approach to humanities and social sciences that will position us for that growth in doctoral degrees going forward?
Well, so that's a really interesting question. And I think, you know, the important part is sort of an examination within the college, right? Right now, there are certain programs that do have doctoral degrees. It's not every program, but it also, you know, what I would state is that as these programs develop and flourish, it's going to raise the category of, you know, basically student populace across the board. So as we approach R1, not just from College of Letters, Arts, and Social Sciences, but across the university, as these rankings sort of move up and we move up in rankings within various, I guess what I'm going to say are like US News and World Report as an example, or other types of things, these become indicators for undergraduate students and perhaps more importantly, their parents, that they should be sending their students here. And so as those baselines increase, I feel like it also will raise these levels forward so that there can be further investment within those categories. In terms of a ground up approach, you know, one thing that you might consider and that people might consider across is for programs that don't have doctoral degrees, how you can create maybe a more transdisciplinary approach to PhD production within the colleges. And I think that there's a lot of ways that various units can contribute to that. And I would point to a program, I would say, actually, I think within your college, between, I believe it's anthropology and history towards the doctoral production degree. I think that this is a really interesting and creative solution. And I've also heard that the caliber of students within that program is extremely high in the graduate program, the PhD program. And so here's an area where you have two different units within the college writ large who've come together to develop what I could say is a highly innovative and an attractive program to meet sort of these needs. And so maybe there needs to be some further discussions as to how different units can fit into these types of ways that we look at it. The other thing I would also say is, I think we need to, as academics, we also need to examine what does it mean to have a doctoral degree, or what does a PhD mean, and what does it mean? And if we're going to be locked into a viewpoint that, you know, I came through this way and this is how it has to be, and be sort of very rigid there, that's one approach that you can do it. But I also think there's an opportunity to examine things in a more holistic way. How are we servicing those students? When we talk about our undergraduate students and making sure that they're retained and that they have a great education the whole way through, how do we better serve programs or our students in our doctoral programs to meet their needs? Many of the people who come through a doctoral program are not going to end up in the academy. And so, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they don't need a doctoral degree to get to where they're going to be. And so I think we need to sort of maybe have a broader conversation about how do we look at graduate education, and particularly PhD education, in a way that is really servicing the needs of the people who are going to be entering the program. I think if we get fixated on trying to create sort of mini-me's of ourselves, we'll get into trouble. But I think it's an opportunity to sort of expand that conversation. There's nothing wrong with people going into the academy, and I'm not trying to discourage that. I want to make that clear. But I think that there's another really interesting opportunity to have a broader conversation about how do we service those people that want those higher degrees for perhaps a different purpose than any of us in the academy ever intended.
Thank you for that helpful answer, and it gives me some food for thought as I look about potential partnerships with other units in our college, but also across the university. And That's what this colloquium is all about, is to provide a forum for those interdisciplinary expressions. So I'm looking for hands or messages in the chat. Anyone like to ask a question? Jennifer Johnson-Loong from mathematics has raised a hand. Please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Thanks. Thanks, Chris, for the talk. That was really interesting. So I'm a mathematician whose primary research area is number theory, but I also have done interdisciplinary work in a number, or maybe transdisciplinary work, even thinking about what I'm doing now. And when I try to get funding for my core research from the Division of Mathematical Sciences, there is not full year, full tuition RA funding for graduate students. That is not how NSF funds mathematics. Are you open to considering full F&A grants from the NSF in, from the Division of Mathematics, for example, the standard grants in the programs of algebra and number theory or combinatorics or et cetera, right? And looking at ways to match those to fund areas that might look slightly different than those that you've considered so far.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Thank you, Jennifer, for asking it. I think we're absolutely open to other areas. So we initially constrained this for the reasons that I talked about in the very beginning of the talk, in terms of the guidelines for P3 itself, in terms of what our financial obligations are institutionally to that. So we're trying to do two different things here. And so we wanted to make sure that there was a basis, if you will, to help reimburse those costs that we're going to have ongoing for the next 50 years. But I think that for these other types of proposals, like I said, the committee that meets, we're discussing, there's been a lot of discussions about should we broaden it to this? Should we put these things into play? So we've been listening. I think it's good to provide feedback to us so that we can consider that as a committee. There is a limited amount of funding for these types of things, but at the same time, we do want to try to bolster all of the research going forward. So what I'd like to do is take your suggestion back to the committee for a further discussion, and we can see if we can do that. If you could send me some information about what the level of those grants in mathematics are, and what do they support? For example, do they support only one student, for example, or do they support no student? Like, I don't know the answer to that. So
I think you're coming to talk to our department on Thursday, so we can also give you some more information there, but we can definitely put some of that in writing for you. Yeah, I mean, mathematics is a different sort of an area in a lot of ways.
sure.
For whatever reason, probably because, you don't have to buy so many things, right? Mostly you fund travel and we teach a lot, and mathematicians across the board, even at the most prestigious universities, except for, a very, very few, but most mathematicians teach a lot because we recognize that numeracy in the society matters. And I think we've seen a lot of that in the last year.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your question.
Thank you.
I'm not seeing any other. Oh, there we go. Holly. Yes, Holly Wickman has a question first, and then Lauren Perkinson. So Holly, please begin.
So I actually have a brief comment. I think that it would be really useful to have a buffer system for accepting TAs so that departments can overcommit and then maybe pay back in the future by accepting fewer students the next year. But one of the things that happens is you think you need 6 TAs to cover your students next year, or 10 TAs to cover your students next year, but then 5 people get grants, and then it's too late to accept more students. So I think, and this has happened in our department year after year because people tend to be conservative. There's no buffer. So if the research office could offer a temporary buffer, I think we could increase the number of students we accept.
Thanks for that comment.
Thanks. Lauren, please go ahead.
Thank you, Kenton and Chris. That was really awesome, helpful information. So my question is related to recruitment efforts. And I'm wondering, because we have so many master's students here that transition into PhD programs, if there are any incentives, financial or otherwise, to kind of keep those master's students here for their PhD, whether that's funding for the first few years of their PhD program, or if you all have had any conversations about that, I would love to hear it.
So we haven't had any conversations about that per se, but I would say that if we have qualified master's students that have been in a program, a graduate program here, and they're familiar with their PI and they're going to transition to a PhD, presumably within that person's program. I don't know what would prevent people from doing that, but I would say if you can recruit people that way, you should, because you have a known quantity. On the other hand, you have a known quantity and maybe you shouldn't if you know them and you didn't feel they were that productive. I'm not telling you to accept them in that case, but it might be an interesting way that we look at recruitment within to better fill those positions out if we're able to. So we haven't had that discussion yet. I mean, that's something that we can talk about further, but we haven't had that discussion yet.
We have a question from Angela Palermo, a journalism graduate of the U of I and a reporter for the Moscow Pullman Daily News. So Angela, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask away.
Hi, yeah, like Ken said, my name is Angela. I work for the Moscow Pullman Daily News, and thanks for taking my question. You mentioned earlier that the university is getting closer to that edge between R1 and R2 institutions, but that there's still a ways to go. I was curious if that's something you think can be achieved in the next 10 years or the next 20 years. Like, what's the timeline on that?
So I'm going to give you a very hand-waving answer that probably won't be satisfactory to you. As I pointed out, the edge that we're doing is a hypothetical edge, right? So in our calculations, we've kept everything static within that scatter plot that I put up earlier. But we know in reality that none of those dots are static, right? They all move around depending on what their research expenditures, their doctoral production, and so forth. Whatever it is, they all move around. And the other thing that I would mention is that Carnegie itself, sometimes they change the categories or they change the classification itself, right? And when they do that, then everything kind of changes around, like different universities get pulled into the different rankings, and it's a relative scale because you're just comparing those outputs against other universities based on how they currently do the formulation. The other thing is that you don't know regularly when they're going to do the evaluation. So before they were doing it like every 5 years, then they did 3, then like now with COVID, I don't know what they're going to do again. So it's hard to predict when they're actually going to do an evaluation. And when they do the evaluation, it's a snapshot. They don't take like a moving average over that 5 years. They take the snapshot at that time, what your productivity is. So if you hit the mark that year, you could be in. If you don't hit it the next time they do it, then you're out, even if your average is such that you would be at that level, right? So it's kind of arbitrary in those cases, and it's hard to say. That being said, if we were to look at the historical data for what we were doing, right, I would say that we could, depending if the trajectory continues to move as it has been, within 5 to 10 years as that window, we should be able to be in that category, assuming that our growth in research expenditures, production, and all those other categories continues to rise at that consistent level. So this is something that I think is achievable, and but that said, I just want to put the caveat that like nothing there is static, as I said. We might be able to make it next year if like a whole bunch of universities in R1 fail. Then you could make it. If they didn't and people moved up, then you won't make it. So it's really dependent on how everybody else moves within the field.
Thank you for the response.
We're past our time, but I've got an excellent question from James Van Leuven in the chat that maybe we can use to wrap up. And so we're wondering, do you expect that the massive increase in NSF and NIH funding that is coming to fall evenly across institutions, or do you expect a major shakeup in the university rankings as a result of that boost? And that's asking you to speculate a little bit, but perhaps if you've got a sense of how that funding increase might be distributed across the country.
That's a really interesting question. So I don't expect it to be evenly distributed across all institutions. Unfortunately, I think it is going to go to different areas, but this is why I've been trying to encourage everybody to get proposals in. So one thing that has been discussed that I can point out is that, so Idaho currently is an EPSCoR state. For those of you, we're an EPSCoR eligible jurisdiction, of which probably almost half the country is in that position. And it means that we received less than 0.75% of the total federal dollars, competitive dollars that are available. And in fact, Idaho as a state, we're somewhere about 0.27% of the total. So we're not even 1% of the total federal funding available. Any movements in that area would be quite significant for the University of Idaho, if not the state of Idaho as a whole. Now, EPSCoR is expected to receive some increases in funding with the new legislation that's being passed forward at the federal level. And in some cases, they've said as high as 20% of the NSF budget could be earmarked for EPSCoR jurisdictions. Now, if that happens, there will be a sizable increase in the amount of funds. But if everybody gets a massive increase at the same time and productivity goes up at that same time, again, because it's a relative index scale, I don't know if it's going to cause movement, but I do think that the more positioned we are to take advantage of those dollars as they come out, the better it's going to be towards trying to achieve that. So if there's going to be a shakeup, it's going to be the people who have proposals in and are trying to get those funds in this sort of once in a lifetime opportunity, I'd say, in federal investment.
Thank you. And on that note, we'll move towards adjournment. But before we end the session, I'd like to make 3 announcements. One, if you joined us late or if you had to leave early, we will have a video recording available on the Renfrew Colloquium YouTube channel starting later today. And then in a day or two, it will also be on the Renfrew Colloquium website, and I put the URL for that in chat. Second, we are seeking proposals for presentations for this interdisciplinary series for spring 2022. And I'm seeing a lot of fresh faces in the audience, and I know there's a lot of great research and creative activity going on around campus that I don't know about. So feel free to email me, kbird@uidaho.edu, if you're interested or if you'd like to nominate a colleague. And finally, next week, our presenter will be Professor Phil Mead from the College of Art and Architecture, looking at the architectural characteristics of the world's happiest places. So as we head into our November gloom, maybe there are some lessons for us from what the Scandinavians are doing with their architecture. So before everyone leaves, if you could want to turn on your camera and give a round of applause, or just as some of you have done already, put a hand up in Zoom. But this has been a great program, lots of questions, and with your permission, Chris, we'll have you back in a year or so for a progress report.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for having me here this afternoon. Really appreciate having everybody's time.
Thanks everyone for your questions and comments, and have a great week. See you next Tuesday at 12:30.